He laughed, and the sound cracked across the dining room like a whip. The tray in my hands trembled just enough to set the candlelight quivering, a dozen tiny flames suddenly uncertain. Maybe he thought I was joking. Maybe he thought I was begging. All I wanted was to trade a song for the price of some pills my mother couldn't sleep without. Before we begin, if this kind of story speaks to your heart, feel free to share where you're reading from. It's always beautiful to see how far stories like this can travel. Enjoy the story. Chapter 1, The Ask on Winter Nights. The Argent hummed like a ship decked in polished steel and softened by flickering gold. It sat 2 blocks from Lincoln Center, convenient for patrons who preferred the illusion of art washed down with Pinot and elegance. They came sweatless and perfumed, wreathed in scarves the color of midnights I couldn't afford to walk. My name is Sierra Vass. I knew the map of that dining room better than I knew my own face. The leftmost banquette creaked. The third table from the window had a wedge of wood under its back leg. If you weren't careful, the water glasses trembled and spilled like nerves. The coat check girl, Kira, wore eyeliner like armor and whispered that every coat she took was a story she would never be invited into. Dario, our manager, had the heartbeat of a metronome and the eyes of a man who measured tips as prayers. I had not been Sierra the violinist for a long time. These days, I looked like a waitress whose wrist bones showed when she tied her apron. I kept my hair in a knot to hide the violinist I used to be, and sometimes, when no one was looking, I touched the notch just below my collarbone where a bow had rested 1,000 hours. The night Cashin Hale and his entourage took the corner booth, snow had smeared the city into charcoal. Their coats were trimmed in something that couldn't possibly feel pain. His watch had the luminescent green of old money. His laugh, when it came, was a weapon. They were celebrating the acquisition of a company I had never heard of, but would later learn built something like delivery drones with better PR. Champagne curled like gold snakes in fluted glasses. He ordered for everyone and left a trail of pronouncements, rare, not medium rare, butter, not oil, no desserts, until he changed his mind. He didn't even look at me when he said, "Darling, the Bordeaux, 1964, not the 70s. Life is too short to tolerate mediocrity." He called me darling the way people call buzzers or elevators darling, like I was a thing that should deliver him somewhere faster. I kept my face still. I poured the wine. He glanced at the bottle's label with an affectionate cruelty, like a man greeting a wild thing he kept as a pet. The night had that busy, breathless rhythm that made the air at the back of my throat taste like citrus and heat. A woman at the bar laughed and turned her head, showing a line of throat I worried my debt might settle in one day. A pianist I recognized from the college played something smooth and soulless in the lounge, something with no edges, background music for lives that didn't bruise easily. And then it happened. It was not premeditated. I had thought it before, I suppose, when tourists asked for stories and tips and buskers wheeled their amps past our window like ambulances of hope. But I had never said it out loud, not here, where music didn't originate in the staff. Cashin Hale held his glass and told a story about how some man had tried to sell him a company by crying. He did an impression of weeping with a twist of his mouth and said, "Nothing is uglier than need." I looked at him, then down at my notepad, then at the bread basket, at the crust of a baguette like a broken plaster cast. And I heard my mother's cough from the night before, the one that had knotted her body and left her eyes wet not from crying but from failure. The pharmacist's voice had been flat. "Insurance doesn't cover that." "Sorry," I spoke before I was sure I could. "If you'd consider a generous tip," I said quietly, "I could play you something, after dessert. A song." His eyes lifted to me as if I'd crawled onto the table. The smile he wore was expensive. It cost other people more than it cost him. "Play me something." He announced it to the whole table, to the room. "Good God, what, on the spoons?" "The violin," I said. He laughed. People laughed when he laughed. It trickled from his entourage, obedient and unthinking. He looked me up and down, calculating the math of my audacity, and found a number worth mocking. "If I wanted music, sweetheart," he said, "I'd buy a symphony." I breathed. There is a kind of breathing you learn when you've had to walk on stage and hold a note in your body when you're certain you'll split open. You inhale like you're promising the air you won't waste it. Without moving my lips, I thought, he doesn't know. He can't possibly know. And then another thought, the rawer one, maybe I am nothing to know anymore. I nodded, and the weight of it sat in my chest like a small stone. Of course, I said, and the table went back to its sparking brags, their laughter like glass chimes thrown into a garbage bag. I told myself to forget it. But forgetting is an art I never mastered. Chapter 2. Before the laugh, the violin was a dark thing with a scar on its side. When I was 12, my teacher told me it was older than my grandmother. I believed him because I needed something older than me to be responsible for the sound we made. We named it nothing. To name, it would make it human. I could trace the line of my life like this. The first day my mother held her breath listening to me play, the scholarship letter with copper plate letters that said yes. The first panic attack in the green room, which felt like dying in front of invisible judges. The day I learned how to rise anyway because my mother had taught me to walk across a room with love on my back like a wing. And then the van. The police report said the word autonomous. The settlement said the word inevitable. The news said the word pioneering and paired it with words like tragedy and isolated incident. My mother said nothing because she was strapped inside a white room whose walls unimaginable patience had painted. We had been on a sidewalk. The future had jumped a curb and decided we were in its way. I dropped out of the conservatory in a week. Dario hired me because I didn't flinch when a waiter dropped an armful of plates and the sound cleaved the room. He said, "That kind of calm is money, flexible schedule." I put my violin in the back of my closet under sweaters that smelled like stress and sleep. I promised myself I'd open it when my mother came home. 3 months later, she came home. Home became a studio with a hospital bed where our sofa had once been. I learned how to lift without hurting my back. I learned about pills that needed insurance to exist. I learned that grief could hold a spoon to your lips and you'd still feel too tired to swallow. When I asked to play for a tip, I could taste the swallow of shame. It didn't taste like anything I'd eaten. It tasted like defeat. But that night, when my shift ended, I didn't go home right away. The staff trickled out into the alley where we smoked or didn't, but haunted the smoke anyway. The snow was dirty at the edges. The dumpsters wore frost like fur. Kira nudged me with her hip so gently it could have been an apology for something neither of us had done yet. "You really play?" she asked. "It was a long time ago," I said. "Is it like riding a bike?" Because I fell off my bike at 12 and now I have a scar that makes boys ask me how I got it like I'm supposed to say something they can fix. I smiled. Then I said nothing. One night of sleep medicine was $66.40. On my phone, a not yet paid bill glowed like an accusation. "Hey," Kira said, "if anyone deserves to be asked for a tip, it's him." Her chin lifted toward the back door through which, like smoke, Cashin Hale and his entourage drifted laughing, talking, wearing darkness like a cloak that didn't stain them. Chapter 3, The Crystal Note. 2 nights later, he came back. The Argent had a policy about confronting celebrities, which was don't. It was listed under the category wealth. The rule was etched in the invisible metal of the staff's bones. When I saw him again by the window, I pressed my tongue to my molars. The phrase my mother used when I was a child came back like a ghost: be brave at the small things. The big things will think they know you and try to claim you. He noticed me when I refolded his napkin. "Ah," he said, "the busker." I tucked the napkin like a flag into surrender. "Music for a tip," he said, as if it were a funny concept he'd invented. "Have you abandoned your career as a violinist?" He made it sound like a punchline. "I abandoned the idea of asking permission to be one," I said. The courage I felt surprised me. Sometimes bravery doesn't arrive as a thunderclap, but as a thin blade you find in your pocket. He leaned back, studyingly. There was a scar near his ear hairline I hadn't noticed. He wore wealth like other people wear a winter coat, heavy, protective, unarguable. "All right," he said. "Make me feel something and I'll tip you $5,000. His friends laughed. He held up a hand and the laughter clipped itself short. "No, truly," he said, turning back to me. $5,000 if you make me feel something I didn't bring in here with me." "You're on," I said. "Dario will love this," Kira muttered when I told her. Dario looked like a man about to swallow a lemon. "No," he said. "We have a pianist for ambience." "He asked," I said. "He asked to order the moon, too," Dario replied. "Are you the moon, Sira?" His voice softened. He called me Sira the way my father used to when he believed in the future. "Please," I said. "It's my mother." I only said those words when cornered. They always felt like throwing my mother under a bus to save myself. He stared at me. When he nodded, It was with the gravity of someone rolling dice knowing the table is tilted. We didn't have a stage. I went to the staff locker room and pulled out the case I swore I hadn't brought and lifted the instrument I had promised not to touch until I could use it without bleeding memories. The rosin smelled like a pine forest that had decided to be useful. The bow felt like a sentence my body already knew the grammar of. I tuned standing in the hallway, the note thin and pure, cutting through clink of cutlery and murmurs like a glass held to the light. The dining room tilted toward silence. Dario, who had the best sense for the theater in any room, flicked the lights so that pools of gold pooled more deeply near the windows while the center of the dining room softened. I didn't ask what to play. Certain music knew you before you chose it. The G minor adagio of Bach had been my first love and the thing I lost in the divorce with fear. It had held me when I was 12 and threw me against the wall when I was 22. I set the bow. It began as a question hung in air. The first note was a thread. I drew it out, I drew it longer, I felt the room catch. Music stole the words from the people who trafficked in them. You could hear the expensive leather of spines shift. You could hear the woman at the bar put her glass down not because she was done, but because she needed both hands to hold something invisible. I didn't perform. I let the notes walk themselves out of me, like they had been hiding. Time braided itself differently in a room like that. Sound pulled past and future together and held them, shivering in the now. I saw my mother's breath measured in the rise and fall of a chest pressed by machines. I saw 12-year-old me refuse to stop because my wrist burned. I saw Cashin Hale tilt his head and stare like a child who hadn't yet learned that looking vulnerable was punishable. In the second phrase, I saw him swallow. There are many kinds of cries. The one he didn't do then was the theatrical kind he had mocked. His eyes didn't fill like in movies. But something in him admitted defeat for a sliver of a second, the way light sees the inside of a house when the door opens up just enough to see the edge of a couch, and a painting crooked on the wall, the kind of crooked no one fixes because it feels like a human lives there. I didn't think about the 5,000. The bow dug deeper, and the adagio told me I was not broken even if I never was whole. At the last note, the room stayed very still, as if the air had decided to remember we are fragile. And then the applause, which began with one person who didn't care if they were gauche, and then rolled like a storm that had been polite long enough. I lowered the violin. Cashin did not clap. He watched me like I had just pushed a key he hadn't known existed and some door in him had unlocked. Then he smiled, not the cruel one. The corners of his mouth recognized the work of sadness. He reached into his jacket and took out money. I watched it the way a person watches a bird that might land on their hand or fly past in good luck with that. He didn't put it in my hand. He set it next to the bread basket and said coolly, "Pass that around to your buzzboys." I looked. It was a check. He had scrawled zeros like a man who could afford them. My throat burned. Not gratitude, not yet. Something else. Something like you think money is the right language for this, and sometimes it is, and sometimes it isn't, and I hate that you'll never need to learn another. Thank you, I said. He tilted his head. What were you playing? Bach, I said. He wrote it when his wife died, or maybe because she lived. You never know with music. Tell me your name, he said. I told him. He said mine back with a pronunciation he hadn't earned, and it still made something in me answer. Come by my office tomorrow, he said. He slid a card across linen. His company name sat on it like a crown, Hale, just the one syllable, arrogant and almost holy. Dario let the pianist start again. People talked again. People looked at me as if they might say something and then decided not to risk it. I went back to the kitchen where Kira hugged me in a way that didn't try to save me from drowning but held me while the wave went over. No one saw the man at the bar slip his phone into his pocket, his hands shaking just enough to mark him as someone who had known a moment smarter than him and had decided to capture it anyway. Later, people would argue about whether he had betrayed the privacy of the room, the sanctity of not turning everything into content. But all that came later. For now, there was the smell of rosemary and lemon and seared fat and the sudden, terrifying knowledge that I had burned a bridge back to anonymity I hadn't meant to cross. Chapter 4. The World Opens. The video hit the internet before my shift ended. Kira showed me her phone in the locker room where there were stickers on every locker that said things like "not your baby." In it, there I was, my face showing more than it ever did in the mirror. In it, There he was, looking like a man trying to remember his own first language. In it, my bow hand never shook, and I knew a stranger would pause it at minute 2 and say, in a voice swollen with opinion that my vibrato was too even for Bach. And someone else would post a paragraph about how art in public should be free of charge, and someone else would say play for the rich, squeeze them for every cent, pour their excess into beauty at any cost. By the time I stepped away from the staff entrance, the snow had been beaten into gray. People look on their phones like they're speaking to ghosts. In this city, we all are. My phone pinged like it had never known attention. There were messages from strangers who wrote in vowels like they were throwing ropes. A woman had sent an email asking if I would consider playing at her father's wake. A man told me I had saved his marriage. A child wrote, "I think your violin sounds like when my dad says he'll be home next time and then he is." And then another message. Cashin office. Noon. At home, my mother slept with her mouth slightly open, which made her young again. I touched her hair the way I used to smooth my own before recitals. I played for her very quietly, the way you play for someone you're afraid to wake. It was not the adagio. It was a lullaby my mother had hummed to a baby who wouldn't sleep, because even then, I needed to know what was on the other side of being awake. She did not open her eyes, but her fingers, for 3 long seconds, pressed invisible bridge strings in air. Chapter 5, The Man Who Laughed the Office, was a glass box in the sky. It smelled like espresso and cedar and something colder. Ambition, maybe. Cashin had a view of the park that made trees look like a painting he might decide to buy or not. He looked up when I walked in, and the face he wore was not the one from the restaurant. He looked imageless, like someone waiting to find out who he should be. "Miss Vass," he said. "I don't answer to Miss anything," I said, then added, "Sierra, please." He nodded as if that were the right joke to make. "I want to invest in you," he said, without preamble. He spread a checkbook like a magician. "You deserve better than playing between beef dishes." "People deserve beef," I said. "It's not a sin to serve it." He smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "You're good, very good. What stopped you?" "My mother," I said. "A van." He blinked. "I'm sorry." "It was one of yours." The room didn't change, but the air around us did something like put its hands on its knees. He set the checkbook down like a hot pan. "That accident is the reason we can't afford her pills," I said. "The reason I can afford humiliation." He straightened with a slowness that made me think of men in movies reaching for a gun and deciding not to. "I don't touch the lawsuits," I said. "The settlements, the words that make human grief into something a company can put on a slide for investors. I know, but you touched it when you laughed at me." He inhaled. "You asked to play for money. And you laughed." He pinched the bridge of his nose, then let his hand drop. "Can I tell you something that will sound like an excuse and is not intended to be one?" "Can I stop you?" I asked. "No," he said. Then, my sister played. And by played I mean like she was taking dictation from God. We grew up in a house where my mother told us to be the very best or to be invisible. She died when Nora was 19. Nora stopped eating. She stopped listening. She drove her car into the lake. I laughed when you offered me music because sometimes laughter is the only thing I've used that keeps me from drowning when art is trying to pull me under. He looked at me like we stood on either side of the same small boat with holes in it, and he was offering me one of his hands while I had put my fist through one of the holes. "And your vans?" I asked. "They pull people under too." He didn't look away. "Yes," he said. "Sometimes they do, and when they do, I pay." I shook my head. "You pay to keep it from costing you more," he breathed out. "You're not wrong." The power imbalance in that room was not just money. It was knowledge that he could throw me into a future I thought I wanted. He could buy me a violin that vibrated under my chin like a translation of a language I'd been trying to learn alone. I could say yes and spend the next 10 years wondering who I owed every note to. "I don't want your investment," I said. It surprised me to hear it out loud because the math in my bank account disagreed. "I want something else." "What?" he asked. "A fund," I said, "for everyone your truth ran over, not a PR paragraph. A fund with names, with faces you have to look at once a quarter, with families you meet, with a number you feel in your bones." He laughed once like he'd been punched in the stomach. "God, you're a terrifying waitress." "I'm a musician," I said. "We don't exist unless people look at us and know we are real." He tapped the table. He was a man who never heard no. It was interesting watching him build a relationship with it. "Dinner," he said. "At the Argent, on me. Bring your mother. No, that was stupid. Bring someone you trust. I'll announce it there. He looked at the skyline like it could answer. I can sell a stock in an hour. I can move a board by lunch. If I choose this. Why? I asked. Because I laughed, he said. And now I can't hear it without tasting salt. For a second, he looked like a boy who might have hugged my coat if the room were darker and we were 12. I left his office with nothing in my pocket but his promise, which felt riskier than cash. In the elevator, a woman in a velvet suit looked at me like I was the wrong music for her floor. My phone pinged. It was an unknown number. Hey, came the text. Journalist, your video. The world is hungry. You want to let it eat you or feed it something. Chapter 6. The journalist's name was Lewin. He met me in a cafe where the chairs looked like they had a PhD. He wore a scarf that suggested he knew how to suffer beautifully. He'd been fired twice for asking complicated questions in public where simpler ones were our line. He winked. Turns out complicated questions are good for subscribers. He had the video on his phone, of course. It's not that you played well, he said. It's that you played there, that you asked him. It's class warfare disguised as art or art disguised as class warfare. Either way, it's juicy. Is that what I am? I asked. Juice. He tilted his head. Everything in this city is if you squeeze it hard enough. He said he wanted to write about me. He said he'd follow me into the bathroom and out if that's what it took. You'll hate me in a week, he said cheerfully. You'll say I made you own things you didn't mean to write, but you'll have said them. I don't have time, I said. I have a mother who needs me and a job that does. And now you have a story that could be money, he said, and outrage, and those two things are the oxygen this place breathes. You could use them to burn down what you hate. You could use them to light what you love. What if I just want to play? I asked. Then play, he said, but watch who builds the stage and who buys the tickets. He looked me up and down as if taking my measurements in a gentle, predatory way. Do you know who else has been calling you? He asked, sliding a folder across the table. Inside were printouts of emails from music agents whose names I'd whispered as wishes. From a label I knew had not signed a classical musician in a decade because they preferred beats people danced to when drunk. From a donor's circle that had pictures of women in pearls smiling with their teeth pressed tight. There was also a single email printed on a page all its own. Subject proposal from Nora Hale Memorial Trust. Make music, the email read. We will help. No strings, no strings. I wanted to laugh until my ribs hurt. I wanted to cry into the phrase until I filled it with my own salt and watched it dissolve. Do you know what this means? Lewin asked. That his dead sister is a ghost who writes emails, I said. That he's not improvising, Lewin said. That he's been thinking about this kind of thing longer than your video's existence. I carried the folder like a trauma patient walking with their own chart. I spent the next nights the way rich people spend money, guilt-ridden and giddy. I played for my mother until our neighbor banged a broom on the ceiling. I played at the Argent until Dario said I would cut into the bar's profits by making people stop drinking. I played for an old woman in the laundromat who told me the first thing she ever stole was a lipstick. I said yes to the woman who wanted me to play at her father's wake. I played as he lay in his living room and wept and smiled in photographs, and the grandchildren sneaked their fingers into the bowl of mini marshmallows meant for hot chocolate, and nobody stopped them because grief is a diet without rules. Some nights I couldn't sleep. I would take my violin out and hold it against my throat and feel the wood like a prayer. I told myself I was not building a narrative or a brand. I told myself I was making a home for my hands in the air. Cashin called twice and left messages that sounded like someone learning to ask a favor without assuming the right to it. The fund, he said. Let's do it. Let's call it the Vass Fund for now. We'll find a name that doesn't make your stomach hurt. Call it the fund for people the future tried to kill, I said when I called back. He laughed and then caught himself. Okay, he said. Okay. Chapter 7. The night of the announcement, the Argent that night was a temple. Dario had unmanned candles in the windows as if we were fiercely backward. The piano was tuned and the pianist, his name was Ren, had agreed to play only in the cracks between my set. I'll play the floor, he said, his smile a soft thread. You play the ceiling. Some of the faces that night I'd have recognized even if they weren't famous because money gives you a face that assumes light. Some of the faces I'd never seen were those whose names would never be printed in programs, but who would have to live with the decisions made by people whose names were. I had asked that the families who received settlement letters be invited. The envelope said "We are sorry" and enclosed a number. The RSVP said yes, and enclosed grief dressed like trying not to make a scene. Cashin came in quiet. He wore a suit with the humility of someone attending a funeral for something they hadn't known was alive until it died. He looked older, or I had learned to see his age. He went to every table. He did something I didn't expect. He listened to people who despised him and didn't flinch when they used words like blood and murder, and only to a degree changed the words in his reply to ones that had less barbed wire. When he took the small microphone Dario keeps for last call announcements, the room fell into that pre-first word hush. "I have apologized with money," he said. "Tonight I apologize with change." He looked at me for one long second, and it felt like standing just inside a cathedral door when the organ sighs and either way, something is about to happen to your soul. "The fund for people the future tried to kill," he said, and there was a ripple of laughter like a wave that could either drown you or carry you to shore. "We've set aside $35 million. It launches tomorrow. Every quarter I will sit here at this table with this violinist, and I will hear from the people this fund serves. I will write checks, I will read names, I will not laugh." Silence. And then, from the back, a man who must have worked in a garage his whole life the way his hands were stained and his fingernails held ghosts of engines, he said, "We don't need your pity." "No," Cashin said, "you need justice. Pity is cheap, I've been cheap. I'm trying to be expensive." The room breathed. Later, someone would argue that he had only done anything because the video pinned him in the world's spotlight. Someone else would say that with or without the video, he would have done something because he had been inching toward this cliff already, and sometimes a breath can make a body fall. I only know this when I lifted the violin that night. The bow felt like it had changed weight, the way a familiar cup sometimes feels heavier in your hand when you suddenly notice the color of the liquid in it. I played again, not Bach, something older, something I didn't learn from a teacher. A Romanian lament I'd learned from a man in a park who played like he was making a map back to his mother's kitchen. The cry in it cut and soothed in the same motion. I watched as the faces changed into faces. Money and grief disarmed each other long enough to look like siblings. I watched Dario stand under the exit sign like an angel deciding whether to smuggle us out or into something. That night, people left checks on their tables that could have paid for months of morphine and a semester of dance classes for a child who needed new knees. That night, someone whispered to me that they had an empty building and a person with a kind heart, and maybe we could start a music school for people who couldn't afford to hear their own music. That night, Kira cried in the walk-in freezer and whispered to the boxes of peas, "It's not usually like this." I walked home with my violin under my arm like a baby and didn't look at my phone because one night I wanted to sleep without strangers' voices in my pockets. Chapter 8. The twist: the city doesn't do uninterrupted hope. It loves a fall after a rise. It adores a scandal like a plant loves rain. 3 days later, Lewin called. He sounded like he was smiling with his teeth bared. "You're going to see a piece in half an hour," he said. "It's mine, you won't like part of it, but I promise to tell the whole story." "What story?" I asked, heart beginning to beat like a drum about to be struck too hard. "He knew you," Lewin said. "Before the restaurant. He knew your name when you applied to the Nora Trust as a student. 2 years ago, he flagged it. There was a conflict." He paused. "Because you'd gotten a settlement from his company for your mother. The rules said you couldn't receive both." My mouth went salt. "I never applied," I said. "I didn't know they existed then." "Your teacher did," Lewin said. "She put your name in without telling you. He flagged it. He was the one who wrote the policy that blocked you. He did it because he thought you'd be exploited by being both a victim and a beneficiary. He wrote you a letter he never sent, apologizing. His sister's name was on the letterhead. He cares. And he is also the man who built the wall you ran into and then pretended it wasn't his wall." The article broke the city over breakfast. It did not say villain or hero. It said complicated and else and maybe. People wanted to burn him and bless him. Some wrote that I was selling tragedy as product. Others wrote that I was lacing art into the wound and that sometimes the only way to stop a thing from bleeding is to give it a song to clot into. He called me. "I should have told you," he said. "I didn't because I am better at shaping what people know than at telling the truth." "My generational sin," I said nothing. Will you keep playing? He asked. Even if I am the wrong person to stand next to. The music doesn't belong to you, I said. It doesn't belong to me either. Then let me stand at the back, he said. Let me hold coats. We didn't speak for a week. In that week, my mother's eyes opened for 7 seconds. 7 is the number you circle when you're looking for a sign you're allowed to stop being angry. She looked at me the way people look at a photo of themselves from 20 years ago, with recognition and disbelief. Then she slipped away again into her kinder dark. I took a gig at a community center where the floorboards knew the stories of children's sneakers and old women's feet in church shoes. A boy named Matteo brought a violin so cracked it looked like it had been left in the rain and then taught itself to survive. I gave him mine to hold. He put it to his chin and winced, and then he smiled, which hurt me in a place money can't reach. What do you hear? I asked when he played a single note like a question. You, he said, before you cried. Chapter 9, The Fall and the Promise. A month later, Cashin stepped down from his company. He did it without a scandal forcing his hand. I wondered if that meant anything or if everything is scandal if you look at it long enough. He sent me a letter. Sira, I laughed. I will always have laughed. The laugh is part of my confession. You changed a piece of me that had calcified. I am setting aside the next 5 years to work on things that won't impress the people who used to matter to me. I'm going to fail at it sometimes because I like winning too much. I'm going to try to like losing at the right things. Enclosed is a check, not for you. For the center you told me about, build the school. Fill it with music that makes people who hate each other sit next to each other and forget for 8 minutes. Also enclosed is a key to Nora's studio. You don't owe me notes. You don't owe me forgiveness. Play there if you want. Break the windows if you need to. Do not let anyone film everything. See, I didn't answer. I went to the studio at dusk. Dust hung like a curtain. On the wall, a line of nails and a ghost of wood where something once hung. A stand, a chair, a small, cheap lamp with a switch that clicked like turning on a memory. There was a violin case on the table. There was a note in a hand that was not his. It had to be hers. If you're reading this, it means I left my door unlocked or I am dead. If it's the first, shove off. If it's the second, take what you can use. Return it if it breaks your heart to keep it. I opened the case. It wasn't a Strad. It didn't need to be. It was wood that had worked for a living. I lifted it, and for a moment I was 2 women, a girl in a field with wind in my hair and a woman in a city room filled with ghosts. I played, not to pay for pills, not to launch a movement. I played the first notes of a piece I had never learned because I had always beelined straight for the songs that broke me and forgot that joy also needs a home. It was Vivaldi and it laughed. There's that word, reclaimed in a way that did not punish. Lewin was in the doorway, leaning, smiling like someone who knows better than to write everything down. He had followed me there and then decided not to bring it to the world. A kind of love, that restraint. He lifted his palms. No article, he said, just this. We can let some things not be content. I let the note hang, and the room held it without asking for anyone to clap. Chapter 10, The Last Bow. The school opened in spring. We called it the door, because that is what music is when you've run out of windows. We filled it with children whose parents worked the kind of jobs people talk about like they're noble, while paying them like they're disposable. We filled it with old men who had carried weight in their bodies for years and needed somewhere to pour it. We filled it with those in between who had almost learned not to ask. Kira ran our front desk like a club she'd decided to let you into if your face told the truth. Dario brought menus and used them as sheet music stands until the board approved the budget for the right ones. Ren played the floor and the ceiling both. Matteo learned to tune by ear, then taught it to me like patience. Sometimes, a bald man in a cap would sit in the back row and put his head in his hands and listen with the kind of intensity that made the air near him vibrate. Sometimes, he'd slip out before the applause. He carried groceries in. He took trash out. He never took a bow. My mother came. We wheeled her into the back, and she blinked like the light was a language she could taste. I played the adagio for her again. Halfway through, she lifted her hand and touched her cheek like a child does when they realize their face is their own. A single tear slid down and cut a track like a little river that didn't know if it would find the sea. I played until my fingers ached and sometimes, until money arrived in the mail with notes that said I saw you and thank you, and sometimes, I don't know the difference. At the end of our first year, we held a concert in the old building that used to be the Argent. The restaurant had moved down the street. The old space had become a performance hall that smelled faintly of rosemary if you caught it at the right angle and memory. Cashin didn't come. Later someone said he was in Romania, hiking in boots that had not been worn by anyone richer than him before. He sent a postcard that said only, "I learned how to breathe at altitude." I looked out over a room filled with people who had decided to lend their ears to something with no guaranteed return. I lifted my violin. The last piece was not Bach. It was something I had written in the hours after wiping tables, in the intervals between giving my mother water and adjusting the pillow under her shoulder blades. It had pieces of the adagio in it. It had pieces of Matteo's cracked note. It had a laugh that did not wound. It had the sound of autonomous vans and the quiet of an empty studio and the way a city listens when it remembers it is human. When the last note hung there, alone enough to be itself, I didn't pray. I didn't thank an audience I had been told to thank. I looked at the doorway. For 1 second, I saw a woman who could have been Nora or me or my mother or someone who had decided not to die yet. We all stood. We didn't applaud immediately. We let the silence be the loudest thing, and it didn't hurt. It felt like a muscle finally unclenching. After, a boy came up to me with a violin tucked under his arm like a small dog. "You're famous," he said, like he was accusing me of being interesting. "I'm alive," I said. "It's different." He frowned like I'd told him a riddle. "Can I play for a tip?" he asked, hopeful and a little proud the way the young are when they rehearse someone else's lines. I kneeled so we were eye to eye. I put $1 in his case, and then a note I wrote in my head the minute I asked for a tip, and a man laughed at me. Never let laughter be the last sound. Make it a sound that opens the door. He read it, and nodded solemnly in that way children have when they're making promises to a future they can't imagine yet. We went outside. The street was rain-washed and lit with the ordinary heavenly light of street lamps. He lifted his bow. He played one long, thin, beautiful note. The city turned its head toward him, not because a billionaire had told it to, not because an algorithm said so. Because sometimes what moves us is a single sound in the night from a stranger's throat. The first time I had asked to play for a tip, a man laughed and the room cracked. I had thought the crack was me. Now I understood the crack was the beginning. That is how light gets in. That is how music gets out. And in an apartment across the park, a man took a breath that sounded like a sob turning into a laugh, and he did not feel punished by it. He put a hand on a letter written by his sister in a looping pen and closed his eyes. He didn't need an audience for that. Some performances are private and deserve to remain so. Every day since, I try to remember the first 2 notes of anything, how they hover, fragile, sure, like the moment after a laugh and before an apology. And then I let the rest come as it wants, no permission, no check. Just a song I can carry between the twin weights of need and love into whatever room I'm needed next.